with that, weren't you supposed to do that like a moment ago? So before we jump into today's lessons, what as I like to do, I like to make sure that we just sort of review what it is that we've sort of been talking about. And last week we looked at the primary concerns, and we looked at the 4 different dimensions that comprise the Confucian system. Okay. I was reviewing for today, and there was this neat part of the outline that I think, because I was like maybe trying to like condense some material, but there's this component of the dimensions that I thought was really interesting. I'm just going to go ahead here and yeah, Juchia, Juchia, and it's rendered as Confucianism. And this word was actually in play before Confucius. It actually refers back to sort of like a scholarly school of individuals. So it was a term in Chinese that was like already in operation, but it gets translated into Confucianism later because that's the primary school. But anyway, just in reviewing, I was like going through because I like to fix errors that I see as I'm teaching. But anyway, do you guys remember what were some of the 2 primary concerns of Confucianism that we covered last time? It's going to be drilled home today. So if you feel like you have forgotten, don't worry. Don't worry. We're going to press into it. Yes, that would be the Ren of the Ren and Li that we're going to talk about today. That humane-heartedness, that humaneness, human in harmony with nature and heaven. Remember, we spent a lot of time. You guys can't see it. I'm going to take a picture of this, concentric circles. But anyway, if you could imagine, Linda and Jay, there is a flip chart here, and on it are concentric circles, all in blue, with the center being the self, and then outward, family, friends, community, nature, and the cosmos. This humaneness, human-heartedness of the person, the individual, in relationship with all these different components of one's existence. So my immediate family, when I was born, it was my mom and my dad and my brother, right? And then into the friends, and then into another family of getting married and having kids, and then social, and then the political, and then the cosmical, right? The national and the cosmical. Like, it just, humaneness goes all the way out. This isn't strictly about one component of the relationships. It's a big concept. Human-heartedness sounds small because it seems located just right here in our heart, but it's a big concept. Okay, and so that's one of the primary concerns. What's the other one? Yes, and that's part of the dimensions, but the other primary concern is that personal transformation. So that because of the unity that Jackie just mentioned, and we'll jump into real quick again in review, when we have human-heartedness and we are in union, we self-transform so that not only do we thrive, but others thrive too. Okay, so we have that symbiotic relationship going on in that unity, in that union. All right, what about the dimensions? There were 4 dimensions I listed. I mentioned. The first one is key. I kind of just hinted at it. Yes, the self as creative transformation. Okay, not creative transformation of the self. The ordering of the words is important because the self in Confucianism doesn't exist in its own, not the way we talk about it. Okay, it exists in that union with other people, with other our immediate family, our external family, our friends, our society, our nation, our cosmos, etc. Okay, that you come into contact with other people is the moment that yourself is sort of in the process of being born, because you learn about yourself in every point of contact. Okay, you don't necessarily learn about yourself by yourself, which is why if you're gonna go, you remember the 90s? Huge pursuit of self in isolation from others, right? I'm gonna go find myself. I'm gonna go walk this really long mountain trail and find myself. Confucius would say, no, 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 absolutely not. You cannot find yourself by yourself. Okay, that's not a real thing. But also, catch 22 for Confucius is that if you do decide to go head up the mountain to go find yourself, it's the mountain goat that's there staring at you as you're meditating on a rock, right? And in that moment, the mountain goat has provoked a sense of self because you are not the mountain goat, right? So anyway, so self as creative transformation. As you are processing through these relationships with all these different facets of life, from the very small to the very big, yourself is perpetually transforming creatively. It's a positive orientation. Does that make sense? Any question about that dimension?
No.
It's the backbone. This is it. Like if you walked away with just that dimension, I would say that you could probably pretty much figure the rest out. This is the everyone can change is absolutely crucial to Confucius's thought. And I was researching, or I was reviewing for today, and I was going through one of my texts, and I was like, wow, it really is the key component. The second dimension was community as a necessary vehicle for human flourishing. That's that unity that Jackie was mentioning. You can't go it alone. Good news is nature functions as part of your community. Okay, though I think Confucius probably really wanted people to be in groups. Okay, he wasn't a solitary, isolated monad of a guy. He was, if you want that, then you want to go hunt down Lao Tzu, okay, and Taoism. That's where you're going to find the single solitary sage heading off into the mountain cave to try to solicit eternal life prior to death. All right. Not so Confucius. He was grounded in the city, in the people, in the urban poor, in the hungry. Like he was down with the people. Okay, so he really, that union with human beings is crucial. Though we can make the argument that the mountain goat is there to provide a sense of unity. Same too with the grass underneath your feet and the rock sensation under your hand, right? Like that's all part of that. Third dimension was nature as home. So speaking of the mountain goat staring at you while you're doing laps in Ure, okay, nature is home. Nature is vital. Nature is necessary. Okay, and so we don't have a place to have relationships, to cultivate our Ren, to watch it bloom into Li, if we don't have a material world. Because we're material girls, right? Who am I quoting? Madonna, right? Right? We're just material girls in a material world. And then I immediately think of the Barbie song, which is, hey there Barbie, let's go party. And then it talks about how she's plastic and how it's fantastic. Anyway, I don't know why I blend those two songs, but I do. But nature is our home. So if we literally just sort of let nature cast off and do whatever we want with it, consume, which I think we talked about, was it here? Did I talk about the Latin definition of consume? I may have done it in a sermon. The Latin definition of consume is to devour until there's nothing left. We are literally consuming our planet. We use consume like I'm going to go home and consume my meal. And by that you mean I'm going to eat all of it, right? But it really has a more devouring sense to it. So We don't want to consume the nature, because if we consume nature, the world, the material world, then we will cease to have a place where we can be material girls. Okay? And I mean that in the sense of having substance, not necessarily just consuming material goods. Okay? The fourth dimension was heaven as the source of ultimate self-transformation. Now remember, this isn't a private endeavor. So even though that dimension sort of had this thrust of like, this is me and my own heaven, it's not, because it's a self-transformation, self as creative transformation. So where you can kind of see how we're looping back around to the first dimension, how they all feed into each other. But self as creative transformation, remember, it has momentum and trajectory. Okay, as I self-transform, I'm going to alter the space around me. And whoever's caught up in those tremors, in those waves of my self-transformation, they are also too going to be caused to answer the question, will you transform with me? All right. And so heaven becomes this thing that is left and right and front and back. I leave it for the generations behind. I'm moving forward and offering it to those who are ahead of me, another generation that's ahead of me. So for me, that would be my parents, right? And then my kids, but then also to my peers. And then if you want to get real abstract, you have the x-axis and the y-axis. Let's throw in that z-axis or whatever it is, that third dimension. You have your ancestors and the culture around you. That will all change and shift as you're building yourself in relationship off of this cultural aspect. And we'll see more discussion about culture in this class today. So after that quick review, let's go back to the consistent thing that we keep anchoring this whole discussion into, postmodernity, where we find ourselves now. How do some of these dimensions, the primary concerns of Confucianism, how can they participate in some of the illnesses and sicknesses we have going on today, and sort of like that metaphysical, not like COVID, I'm not talking about. I don't think Confucianism can actually address COVID. Taoism can. Taoism would be very full on, just everyone separate. But how does Confucianism address some of our social ills and concerns and tumult that is going on now, thinking of the four dimensions and the two primary concerns? Yes, return to a unity of the person rather than this duality. Americans and Westerners in general, not Western Americans, but people in the West, still suffer from that Greek understanding of the soul and the flesh being like two distinct things. We're really whole people. And that's how Confucius would have seen it. And I think that would allow people to maybe embody their narratives a little bit more and maybe care about the narrative that is actually around them. Yeah, so I think it's a great suggestion. Mind, body, wholeness. Mind, body, spirit, wholeness. What else? Remember, we had absence of universal truth, submission of the ego, unwillingness to listen to other truths, and fracturing. We could add in there alienation and isolation. We could add in there numbing and consumption, right? So any other ways that Confucius here helps us to look at postmodernity and maybe begin to offer some potential solutions, cures? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if the self isn't found in isolation, then are you actually finding yourself if you are isolating from all of your supposed narratives, right? These concentric circles are important. Remember when Jay first showed up to class, I said, Jay, tell us about yourself, but you can't mention where you were born, who your parents are, who you're married to, any of your kids, what you did for a living. And the response was what, Jay?
That was all the stuff that was worthwhile.
Yeah, you can't do it, right? Because our default is to define ourselves in relationship. And that's Confucius's main point. So anyone who's trying to go at this existence alone without navigating the stories and the narratives, then that's going to be problematic. It's just going to end up with it's going to be stuck, right? You're going to be stuck in your own thought processes. That's why when we deconstruct religiously, if we deconstruct in isolation from a trusted mentor or advisor or something, you could end up just affirming your own internal fractured narratives, right? So, what else? What does Confucius have to say to us today in light of what we just talked about? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Really, really, really well said. For Confucius, one of the ideas, and again, we'll touch on this in the lecture coming, one of the ideas is that we build off of what was. We don't want to do that hard 180 and curve in, do that Martin Luther, do the Martin Luther, do the Martin Luther, do, right? You don't want to like curve in on yourself and cling to traditionalism. I think that's what happens. When you start to cling to it, it turns into traditionalism. You want to bravely go into that dark night of what is unknown, knowing that you stand on a firm foundation of your ancestors that have proceeded through and are now standing right behind you. Okay. And then you will slip off into ancestry as well once you transition off of this timeline. So yeah, there's a building forward from the past. It's not a firm break. What we have going on often in our more conservative context, and conservative, remember, is a momentum. When we talk about politics or political parties and we say, oh, conservatives and liberals, those two are not actually in opposition. Conservative and progressive are actually the two terms you want to use, because conservative is a momentum. It's a slow momentum. Sometimes it feels like a dead stop, but it's just slow. Change should happen slow and on smaller scales. Progressive is, let's do this big and bold, right? So it's a faster movement, right? And then you have communal and liberal. Don't tell everyone in our area, but everyone in America is technically liberal, because we highlight the individual. That's what liberal means, right? The opposite of liberal isn't conservative. It's communal, the group. Okay, so when we look at all these things, and like, this is why I start to like twitch, because I'm like, I don't know if they're using that word right. And sometimes too much education is a bad thing, right? Because it was a lot easier like 5 years ago. But anyway, we we need to like move forward into this future, keeping a hand on what was. Just look at the state of the church as a great sort of microcosm, or the stamp, right? Like the stamp has changed, and it has changed even in value, but it's still that weird square rectangular parallelogram that you stick on things that get things from here to there. But it has changed colors, and it has changed denominations of cash, and now it doesn't even have one. It just, I don't even know how much is 60 cents. I remember when it was 29, 28. I think there was one time it was 28. I think. And then right after that, then it was 40 something. And I think that's when they went to the forever stamps, right? But anyway, it's still the same thing as the stamps from like the 1800s or even earlier, right? But the shape harkens back to what was, but the images on the front change, right? Same thing with the Confucian relationship with that culture and that history. It's not just a letting go and cutting off, nor is it a turning in and clinging to the point where you become this calcified monad, clinging to your own traditions and your own understanding. But you move forward knowing that you're carrying some of that with you, but it might change shape and form. Okay, right? I like to use the imagery of the table when it comes to that, because I feel like the table in the church has changed shape, substance, material, but it's still a table, right? And it will continue to change. There will be a material that the table will one day take form in that I may not have known, but it's still going to be a table. So the idea of this table moves through history, taking on the cultural context that it finds itself in. Okay, so too should our biblical interpretation, so too should our language, so too should we. All right, and that's kind of core Confucianism. Any questions? No, you're good? Okay. Before I jump into the component that we're looking at today, which is teachings and core values, this is pretty much a big old discussion of Ren and Lee. It's super fun. I want to offer a moment for any potty breaks. Anyone have to use the? Okay. Just, just I'm used to teaching teenagers and they will take a break whenever you give them one. So, all right, well, if everyone's willing to stay, let's jump into what we're talking about tonight, which is the teachings and core values of Confucianism. This is the best way in. There's no prayer book. There's no liturgical calendar. There's no, it's either you're going to find a Confucian sage or you're going to read the Analects. This is where the best way to get into the heart of what Confucianism is. This is the revered sacred text of the Confucian tradition. You guys see it? Okay.
Yes.
The Analects. Okay, it comes in many forms and different translations. This is the one that I have because it was touted as the best translation, but they always change because translations should change, in fact, because people change. But anyway, this is where you're gonna really sort of jump into the master sayings, okay? This was compiled, remember, I've already referenced this, but don't forget, this was compiled by the second generation of Confucian disciples. This was not written by Confucius, okay? And it's a book, okay? It's not holy. We don't need to have bibliolatry with it, right? I would argue too that our Bibles can be smacked around a little bit because those are witnesses to something. It's not the thing itself, especially this, because remember, Confucianism doesn't have a divine spirit that's penetrating into the material world and like making things to reveal and manifest, right? This Confucius is like, this is ground up. This is material, I'm material. This isn't holy, I'm not holy. It's sacred, it's good because it's got enlightenment in it, but it's not, it's okay if it falls to the ground, right? I would argue it's okay if the Bible drops as well. And if you ever get a moment where you're sitting in front of like maybe 4 grades of students who have a hard time understanding that, I recommend dropping one for them so that they can see that everything ended up okay. I'm an iconoclast. So this is where you get the spirit of Confucian pedagogy, Confucius's thought in action, and reveal the inner person of Confucius. When we read those dialogues, like, and the master said, we're seeing quotations that have been held dear, that were orally transmitted and then written down. But we get to see this human being from so long ago live and breathe and have these opinions. We get to see his heart, we get to see his mind. And that's a really special thing. The dialogues reveal his ambitions, his fears, his joys, his commitments, and above all, his self-image. You can sketch Confucius from the Analects. Okay. You can gather some of the most important things, because I don't think that he sees human life as like this thing that you need to, like a forever thing. He sees it as a limited thing. So he's going to spend all of his time saying what he thinks in a humble way. Okay. The Analects is a communal memory, a literary of those who considered themselves beneficiaries of the Confucian way. It's why those quotes feel disjointed, right? Like you go from, Feng went in and asked the master about quote G, and then the next one is like, the master said that the pagans to the north are vicious and brutal, but it's like a clean break. Hebrew poetry functions this way too, but I almost feel like the Analects is like a slideshow. Click, 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 click. Image, image, image. Not a moving picture, not a fluid picture that's running on reels. Okay, same thing with Hebrew poetry. It's click, 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 click. Okay, and so that's how I read the Analects. Any questions about the Analects?
No.
Great thing is we don't have to get into deep dive discussions about authorship or divine inspiration. They were written by the human beings that considered themselves the worthy recipients of Confucian tradition. So I just think that's neat. One of the other core values, one of the other teachings, is the social relations and relationships among individuals. Okay, again, this is vital. These concentric circles operate all through and through and through all of Confucianism, because the person is not alone. Okay, first and foremost, who here spontaneously generated themselves? No? You didn't spontaneously generate? No, you were born, right? This means you were born into at least one other, okay? If you were at home with midwives, it may have been a whole host of others. If for me, I had all my babies in an OR, which means there was a lot of others around doing their jobs. But we're never born alone. We're never born in isolation from others. We don't even come into, our gestational process isn't solitary, right? Everyone has a womb, right? Everyone had a womb that they spent time in. So that we're always given some other. Interactions with others is how we become fully human. You want to think about like the Jungle Book here, right? What happens to Mowgli in the Jungle Book? He gets, who here has read the Jungle Book? It's probably got a lot of issues, socially speaking, but he gets adopted by wolves, right? Or animals? Just animals in general.
A bear.
A bear, blue, right?
Balu. That's
Balu.
bear in Hindi.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and he has to, once he's found by these humans, he has to be like retrained to be human, and then there's this, But anyway, Confucius says that for us to learn how to be human, we have to be in relationship with other humans, okay? So it's completely logical, and it makes sense. In fact, human care, according to Confucius, is interconnected and relational, to bring comfort to the old, to have trust in friends, and to cherish the young. That's that multi-generational aspect that you were kind of talking about, Tim. Like, it's make new friends, but keep the old ones. Some are silver and the others gold, right? Like, same thing with family members. You don't just let your grandparents like wash off into like oblivion because now they're old, so they're of no purpose to you. And you don't dismiss kids because they're too young and they're not fully human yet because their frontal lobes haven't matured, though that is a very good potential argument. I would say. But you keep these people close. These are the people who define you. Your grandparents participate in part of your narrative, and your kids participate in part of your narrative. The elders in your community participate in your narrative. Same to the younger generations that follow after you. They participate. And we have all these arrows. So if you could imagine, I'm a mess. I'm a total mess right now. Okay. If you could imagine, thank you. I appreciate that. My therapist has to correct my language all the time. Okay, so we have all these relationships and we are all interconnected. So if this is, so guys, on this pad, I'm gonna I'm just gonna make this a little bit bigger. Okay, here you are, right? And let's just say to the left, we have like older gen. And then here we have younger gen. Okay, and then here we have some other aspects of like friends, family, society, and then let's just say nation. All of these things have this double trajectory where they influence you, but remember, it's not anthropocentric. Confucianism is not anthropocentric, it's anthropocosmic. It goes, and I'm not like, it literally, these things go off the charts in their trajectories because it's going to hit the cosmos. But these movements, these momentums, these relationships are fluid and move. They're not static, okay? In the West, we may look at our partner of like 25 years and say, you've changed. I don't know who you are anymore. And then it's like, oh, that's the worst thing you could say, right? In Confucianism, it's, well, thank you. Okay, everything should be in this trajectory, and like you're not this like solid material substance where you just absorb all of this. It courses through you, right? It's just got so much momentum and movement in it. It's not solitary, it's not static, it is completely dynamic. These relationships are core, and as they go through the person, they change and alter, okay? So it's just got a real dynamic capacity to it. This human care and relationality poured into this political theory and praxis. This means that all of this, for Confucius, it's going to mean something very specific, that what I do in the home necessarily impacts what I do out in the world, okay? The home values will eventually leak out into the political values. You don't have these separations of spheres, okay? Now, we separated some spheres because I think we wanted to keep some part of our population sort of docile and locked up, and then the other part out in the world. But in Confucianism, this whole thing, you know, your family relationships are impacting your national relationships, okay? Your society relationships are impacting your friend relationships. Your relationships with the older generation are impacting your relationship with the younger generation, and vice versa, right? So there's this very fluid, dynamic aspect, and the private and the public are not two separate spheres that never in the twain shall meet, right? It is definitely, these things do impact each other. This human care, hold on a second. This is where the scholarly community comes into play. All right, so in this big mess of relationships and the fluidity and the trajectories, the scholarly community is supposed to come in and address institutions that have the capacity to assist in self-transformation, okay, in that creative self-transformation, in the cultivation of the humaneness. Remember, as we are orienting ourselves towards all these different relationships, that human-heartedness should be growing, okay? It's the fellowship of the profound persons that is not to be a separated mode of existence, but is supposed to be embedded in the community, all right? We tend to think more education higher up the pedestal and to the elite ivory tower, right? Where I can pontificate about things. I can do the thinking upon thinking, which is, I think, the ultimate good of Aristotle's virtue ethics. I can do the thinking upon thinking upon thinking upon thinking. And this is the true and worthy way of, I was caught there, way of going about life. Confucius wants all of his sages, he wants the profound persons in the society because it's from there that change actually occurs. The mission to reformulate and revitalize the relational institutions of social solidarity and harmony and prosperity, i.e. the family, getting into the core unit of the relationships, which would be back to this one. He wants that profound persons group to be influencing this sphere, because from there, all these other relationships are impacted. Okay, but there's a high value placed on this saging. And so the profound persons aren't supposed to isolate themselves and write in their scrolls. They're supposed to be of the people for the people. Okay, otherwise, why? Right? Why are you doing that? And not only that, but your writing is going to be disconnected from the people. So one of my friends shared with me that they are working on something academic, but they're also simultaneously frustrated because they have to do some service jobs. And I was like, and those service jobs are actually going to keep you and your academic writing grounded. Right? Because it's when we are located in the people that remember that we are doing this for the people. I think Confucius has the same thing going on here. And self-cultivation is on the basis of, is the basis for social order, which is the basis of political stability and peace. Okay, family ethics, politically efficacious. All right, what's going on in the family is going to necessarily impact the way that this family operates in the local community, in the broader state, in the nation. Confucian conceptions of politics as rectification. Rulers lead ethically, morally, and exemplary, and not by force. This is where we get the idea that a Confucian leader is only respected if they are worthy of respect. It's not the title. We tend to base it off the title. We will call every former president that is still living Mr. President. Okay, but Confucius would be like, no, it's strictly about whether or not that person performed with respectability, with Ren and Li. Did they earn the respect of the people? Because as soon as the people, this is the dangerous thing. And this is why I think people remain sort of alienated and isolated against each other in this animosity that's unfortunate, because the people have a lot of power if they were to team up and decide, no, we're not putting up with this anymore. And that's where Confucius sort of comes from, is that it is important for rulers and subjects to be of equal agreement, that the ruler is a ruler and the subject is a subject, but it's not by force, it's not by power, it's not by cash dollar. It's by, am I respect worthy? Do you respect me? And if the people say yes, then it is a relationship. If they say no and turn their back, that guy's not a ruler. Okay? It's really empowering if you actually think about it. Government is supposed to provide food and shelter and education. These are basic concepts that Confucius argued for. Human beings in the care of the government, the way that the government earns the respect of the people is by providing the basic human survival needs of the people. That's human-heartedness. And that is, providing those things is the ethical praxis of that human-heartedness. And in that would generate the respect. This is a humane government. I can respect it. These are the authorities. When that stops, the people have a right to kind of walk away from it. Law and punishment are minimum for order. Social harmony through ritual performance. Ritual performance is the participating in communal mutual understanding. And this sort of resonates, if you're familiar with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, this will resonate with his understanding of justice and politics, that it's this communal effort and work, and that's going to benefit everyone. And so, but Confucius, just remember, is writing way before, okay, way before Aristotle. So ritual performance and participating in communal mutual understanding, perfecting your li through your ren, that human-heartedness manifesting in that ethical praxis that is oriented towards the other and towards the world, okay? Elm bug, go away. Okay. Hold on a second. Yeah. And then there's a whole bit on filial piety, which is a little bit of a later development, but it's definitely that core child-parent relationship is sort of like, if you're going to look at the relationships as the core, child-parent becomes the nucleus of all those concentric circles of relationships, okay? This is going to get tweaked out of proportion when it comes to Mencius, and the more, again, the more traditionalist Confucians are going to really hammer in a little bit more of a hierarchy. That's not natural to Confucianism, but that son-father obedience is what's going to get pushed. But that filial piety is the same thing that sort of is that fractal. Child obeys parent, lives in harmony with the parent, and then that child becomes an adult that lives in harmony with the local community. That local community lives in harmony with the state. That state lives in harmony with the nation. You see how it starts to reproduce itself. And so that's why the nucleus of all those relationships is that filial piety, the first step toward moral excellence. The home matters for Confucius. Not yet, not with Confucius, because I think Confucius would probably say that like he didn't have a dad present. His mom was his all in all. So I think that he would just locate that family unit. But what happens is when you start to, when this relationship gets to be pushed into directions that cause it to become toxic, we will see that, and we'll talk about it too, because it does become problematic, especially in the three bongs. And that's where you start to see where women are relegated to the home and men are relegated to the state or something like that. Yeah. Filial piety is not supposed to be unconditional submission, but reverence of the source of life. Again, notice that language, source of life, that's maternal language. And so that's, again, filial piety is going to be twisted and manipulated into something else. But the original idea is just, dudes, respect your parents, because whether or not you really like them, they kind of brought you into this world and are doing their best. And so let's work together, because one day you're going to be an adult and maybe a parent, and then you're going to realize you were very judgmental as a kid. I'm just speaking for a friend. I did not have that experience because I was a perfect child. Just kidding. I just let my brother take all the heat and I just slid under the radar. All right, any questions before I move into relational order? This is where we're going to get into a little bit more of like where things start to kind of go wrong. Any questions about this stuff so far?
I have a question about truth.
Truth.
Yes. So the way you were describing it, like the way we think of truth is you tell me something and then in my mind, I'll decide if it's true or not. I can find truth by myself. But in the Confucianism, then it would be, I would really go to my community and rub up against other people to find truth.
Yes. And it's not a solitary thing. It's not yes or no. The binary, we love our binaries. Okay. It's going to be my favorite, the thing that it reminds me the most of, Jay, is that when in some schools of rabbinic training, they argue with each other. This is like, we're all still friends, but they argue with each other for their own points of view, knowing full well that somewhere in the collision of all those arguments, the truth exists, that no one actually has a claim to it. This is why community is so important, because if it's just up to Lauren to determine what Jackie said is true and what Tim said wasn't, I'm going to filter it through a very specific experience. So when we come together and we all decide to start talking about what is true, then not true, what is true, then somewhere in that relational collision of all those different engagements is the truth. And so we need that robust experience. That's a really, I'm so glad you asked that. At first I was very intimidated because, oh Lord, true. But I love that you asked it because it's so crucial, because I think that in the West, we have the mindset of, I determine what's true for me. And to some extent, yes, but please do it in relationship with others. At least bounce that truth off of others so that you can have it dissected, so that you can maybe hear a narrative that's not the one that's in your head. Because remember, logic and sense has a strong subjective component. Okay, I will go to my therapist and I will be like, all like, you're gonna be so proud of me because I did X, Y, and Z. And then she'll sit there and listen to me tell the story, and then she says these dastardly words every single time. You know that part of that is the trauma narrative that you have going on. And I was like, what? But it made sense. My actions and responses, and I felt like I was being calm and, not reactionary. But another person can hear where your narrative has taken a turn that might not be the most beneficial for you. But if you keep that all to yourself, if true is just truly what postmodernity wants to argue, something you determine at all turns, that is a terrifying existence. Because in here is some real beauty and some real chaos. Okay, so that's a great question, Jay. Thank you. Yeah. So moving into relational order, the path to social harmony runs through human flourishing, and human flourishing is made possible through right relations with other human beings. These relations are, according to Confucians, hierarchical by necessity. Okay, but again, remember that the key component is that human-heartedness. It's not a tyrannical despot. Okay, it's not by force and fear and threat. There's a hierarchy. You hear this language when you get into some circles talking about like heterosexual marriage, like there's the male leadership that is supposed to be a laying down of life, and then there's the female submission, which is supposed to be this life-giving, is also a laying down of life. We work through this language in very nuanced ways. And same thing too is happening here, which is why the relational orders have an open back door that allows this toxicity to kind of enter in and become tyrannical, right? Anytime you have a necessity of hierarchy, it is such a tenuous line to walk, because it can be difficult to walk it just right at all times. It gets a little bit messy. Rectification of names is something that comes up here, and this has two principles to it. One, things are called what they are, and things should conform to what they are called. Okay, in our 2022 ears, that's going to sound a little bit very oppressive. There wasn't, for Confucius, remember, there's no independent self apart from relationships. So no one is going through the process of like that self exposure. Okay, because you are who you are in relationship to who you're in relationship with. So a baby um, uh, presenting as male at birth would necessarily be a son in this Confucian system. And then the son would respond to the parent, mom or dad, and would have different relationships, but things that are what they're called. Okay. And in that, I would not only have a name that my parents would give me and then a sex assigned, then that would also determine my realm of maneuverability. And then that's where I would operate, and I wouldn't necessarily operate out of that. Okay, so you can see where Confucianism would potentially need a radical overhaul to fit in with what's going on today with that self revelation and exposure that people do, and they really should be able to tell us who they are, and what is materially isn't necessarily what's going on internally, and those things do have a right to align. Okay, and this definitely speaks to a enforcement. Okay, you have a role that you've been born into, so now you're going to perform it. But again, it's not supposed to be in this despotic way. It's supposed to be this mutual respect and love and harmony. Okay. Disharmony and disorder occur when this is rejected or ignored. And you hear that language a lot in other aspects of our society and culture that are afraid of what's happening with gender and sexuality. Okay, it's chaos, it's disorder. Well, it only is if we refuse to let it speak and define itself. It doesn't impact me, actually, in the sense that it shouldn't make me afraid. Does that make sense? It only feels like chaos if somehow what someone else determines about themselves somehow impacts me. But I can still be me as they self-transform and transform with them. Let's go back to the Confucian ideas of like Ren, right? It's that mutual self-transformation. So the only time it becomes scary is if I cling to what I know and what I have determined to be. That's where it starts to get scary. I do think Confucianism at this point, at least in the outline, isn't making a lot of room for the LGBTQIA+ community. That's not there. Can it? I think it can. I think the basic principles and those dimensions definitely lend it to be a little bit more flexible. But what we're looking at here, and you can see, you can hear it, it's going to go bad. Okay? Now, the 5 relationships are ruler, subject, parent, child, husband, wife, elder brother, younger brother, friend, friend. Okay? You have procreation in there, you have marriage in there, you have different age groups in there, and then you have that social connection. Each relationship should be characterized by 2-way mutuality and reciprocity rather than 1-way obedience, care, and respect. Remember, I've been trying to walk that very fine line to allow Confucianism the moment to sort of say, but care and respect are crucial for these relationships. Otherwise, when those are absent, then you do have that fear and terror and threats and condemnation, and those aren't aspects of Confucianism. However, it's a very hard line to walk very effectively. And so when we get to Mencius, who created the 5 relationships, okay, and he's going to kind of take them in a little bit more of a severe way. So father-son. Love between father and son is intended to show that the proper relationship between them is mutual affection rather than 1-way obedience. Also offers a guidance for those who fail to live up to the norms specified for such a relationship. Since affection between mother and son is more natural than that between father and son, love as a virtue can perform a compensatory compensatory function harmonizing this transgenerational relationship. Okay, the mother-child relationship kind of gets dismissed, all right, and it's the father who has to work towards this manifestation of love for the child. And remember that this is before the current era. So like, my husband was a baby wearer. All three of my kids, he wore skin to skin, and never once thought that he had a hard time bonding with the kids, right? But this idea of this father-son bonding. And then this bleeds into the ruler-minister. Duty between ruler and subject is an acknowledgement of the danger of organizing the single most important political relationship in terms of personal profit. The principal duty of one, or more appropriately righteousness, is sharply contrasted with profit, and two, for both moral and pragmatic reasons. Any attempt to profit unjustly or abuse their power in any way, in fact, makes their legitimate claim to leadership suspect. Mencius unequivocally states that the prince must earn the support of his ministers. Okay. So there again, that care and respect, care and respect. And then the husband-wife, male-female, defines the husband-wife relationship as a distinction, a division of labor. Wife should be considered equal, equality is not the equality of our era, distinct yet equal. Men have their task and women have their hearths. Wife as homemaker being challenged today. The division of labor to raise a family is necessary even today in Confucianism influenced culture. So some of these aspects are definitely being challenged, but you can still see there's kind of that regular template of parent, child, ruler, subject, husband, wife. Okay. And we could argue that if there isn't actual true equality, then that equality is fake. Okay. But again, in this Confucian system, that's just what these relationships look like. And then we have the old and the young. Precedence of the old over the young governs more than sibling relationships. It underscores age as a factor in organizing human relationships. Okay, so age is thus an ordering and sequence principle. Okay, there's a respect for your elders, even if it's your brother or it's your parent or it's your grandparent. You have a respect for the elders, but the elders don't just have it because they're elders. It's because they've cared for you. Big brother looked after you, parents have fed you, and grandparents have told you the stories, right? They have cared for you in that way. Friend, friendship based on neither rank nor age is the paradigmatic expression of the spirit of mutuality. Centrality of friendship is moral exhortation, provides a basis, the teacher-disciple relationship, which in turn offers a model for Confucian self-understanding in reference to the ruler. So this friendship thing is an exhortation of creative self as creative transformation. Okay, you should be ironing, sharpening iron. Is Jay leaving? Yeah. Bye. So there's this equality and mutuality, but it's always with the eye towards that self-transformation for both people. And then that will bleed into social relations, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, friendship built on faith and trust because of mutual quest for the flourishing of the other rather than providing creaturely comforts. Okay, this isn't the person who's like your yes person. Okay, notice that in Confucianism, there's no such thing as like your yes man or your yes woman or your yes person, right? It's just you want people who are perpetually challenging you and not playing devil's advocate, but like by their presence ask you to grow with them, and vice versa. Vice versa. Any questions about those relationships? It's tricky to navigate them looking at it from this perspective in 2022, because it's like, even in the 4 years that since I actually taught this in a classroom, a lot of things have changed in terms of our language and what's going on. And how we talk about human beings and how human beings have the right to define themselves. And so even now it's like, oh, this is tricky having to talk about this. But it's good because the challenge is going to cause self-transformation, always. Education, Ren and Lee, and we've been talking a lot about this, so I don't have to spend too much time here because I really want to get to text analysis. Heart of Confucian ethics is the virtue of Ren. Ren is humaneness, humanity, benevolence, altruism, love, and compassion, human-heartedness, right relations among people. Okay, Ren is where it's at. And then Li is the literal translation is to arrange in order. So human-heartedness, love, Li is structures, and we love in structures. That's sort of Confucianism's thing. Like we love in these relationships in this way. We love our parents by being a good child. Our parents love the children by being good parents. Okay, but that Li is that actual working itself out into arranging this order. Love orders us. Okay, I would argue that you could probably ditch a lot of that role, the role relationships in all those relationships that were mentioned. But this is where I err alongside Martin Luther by saying, like, if everyone truly loved each other, you would care for each other without someone having to say, you know, you would be a way better partner if you did X, Y, and Z, right? Love does order us, and so Ren is that love, and Li is that orderedness. So I'm ordered towards you, and I want you to thrive. So I'm going to do what I can to help you thrive. Okay. Li and Ren are two sides of the same coin. Together, Li and Ren produce harmony in the individual, the society, and the cosmos. Okay, and I've been trying to hammer home Ren Li, Ren Li, Ren Li, so that you can kind of have an idea, so I didn't have to spend too much time. Li is so important to Confucians that it can be referred to as Li Jiao, the religion of Li. Okay, so that orderedness. Chaos is bad, order is good. And if you remember Confucius' story, you know why chaos is bad. It's part of his story. And then we have the three bonds, and it's possible that I may have confused the three bonds for the 5 relationships, but these definitely do. We're going to get into it, but some stuff gets tweaked. The 3 bonds were added to the 5 relationships later, about 4 centuries after Mencius developed the virtues of the 5 relationships. Okay, so I have to go back and verbally correct. Mencius was not the problem. It's what comes after him. This is the problem with reviewing real quick and relying on what I taught 4 years ago. Okay, I knew there was a problem coming up. I thought it was Mencius. It's not Mencius, he's okay. But after him, the 3 bonds get attached to the 5 relationships, and that's where we start to see this kind of septic, static kind of tyranny going on. Regularizing these relationships assists in maintaining these relationships, private and public. But the legalist adherence to the 3 bonds reduces mutuality, relegates it to the background in favor of order and social stability. Human flourishing is diminished and malnourished. Well-being of the individual is not in view, just the collective social stability. Okay, if you do just a quick recall of your knowledge of some Chinese history, a lot of what I think has been appropriated to certain leaders and their political orientations actually comes from the ground in these 3 bonds. Okay, where the individual gets eclipsed by the community and everything gets leveled. Okay, I don't think it's fair to blame one whole political theory for something that is deeply invested and participates in the culture of a nation, right? We could say the same thing in our own territory, but I'm just highlighting that I don't think there's always just one reason for things, but these 3 bonds definitely seem to level out that mutuality and care and respect. Okay, no, you don't matter, it's the community. Okay, we could argue that there's probably some of that in operation in our own realm, but in a weird way, if you want to twist it. But anyway, that's sort of the core teachings, okay? We have that Ren Li, we have the 5 relationships, we've got that later edition of the 3 bonds. We have education, and let me just roll up here. 3 bonds, Ren Li, 5 relationships, that orderedness, social relations, and the analects. Those are pretty much the core kind of teachings. That's what you're going to experience. Any questions? Yeah. The 3 bonds are, I think I skipped it, the top part. I think it rolled too far, and then I just, let me see. 3 bonds, 3 bonds. Okay. In the modern egalitarian and liberal perspective, the least appealing of the Confucian ethics is the so-called 3 bonds, namely the authority of the ruler over the minister, the father over the son, and the husband over the wife. Okay. So if you think about, like earlier in the outline, we briefly talked about these basic structures: father, son, husband, wife, ruler, subject. The 3 bonds is something that's added 6 centuries after Confucius, because Mencius is, maybe let's say 4 generations, 6 generations after Confucius, because Mencius is 2 generations after Confucius. And Mencius comes up with the 5 relationships. And then the core 3 relationships are that father-son, filial piety, which bleeds into that husband-wife and then into ruler-subject. But the 3 bonds put an extra dose of authority in there. This overness, it becomes important in that definition. I wonder, that's such a great question. I wonder if I haven't, rolled all the way through to the end. I think we may get into some of that when we start talking about missing voices, which is where I offer the feminist perspective of the tradition. But I think that it could just be external influence. Buddhism, I don't think has a high regard for women. They're kind of in the background. And when we think of Chinese culture being the composite of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, then you can maybe see some of that influence coming in. But usually that stuff is external. Not usually, but when you're dealing with this one system that seems to have this egalitarian and mutuality, when you see it go, then it's an external influence has started to seep in. So when European missionaries, white missionaries, go into Africa and they have these like concentric circles of like operation between men and women, and everything's sort of on the level playing field, the missionaries say, no, that's not what God wants. God wants you to be in the right order. And then you start to see this subjection of women to men, which wasn't inherent to some of the tribes in Africa. And then you start to see this sort of, authority and abuse and toxicity sort of making its way in. So sometimes it just represents that there's been an external influence. Hinduism also doesn't have a high view of women, or didn't, looking at the structurally, thinking of the timing, there are feminist Hindus and feminist Buddhists and, feminist Confucians. So obviously there's room. But yeah, I'm thinking it's probably external. I don't think it was inherent. Always take Confucius as a man of his time, women definitely had a place, but I don't think it was like in subjection to men. So. Any other questions? Pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. Okay. You guys need a little walk around before we jump into just looking at a couple of texts? You good? Okay. Okay, so let's move into share screen mode. This way our Linda can see them too. She's there, but we have it set so that if your video is not on, you're not displayed. So let's go here and let me make it big. Day 4. All right. The master said, if even riches might properly be sought, I would surely make them my aim, even if it meant being a fellow carrying a whip. But if they may not be properly sought, I shall pursue those things which I admire. Confucius said that. What's going on? The master said, even if riches might properly be sought, I would surely make them my aim, even if it meant being a fellow carrying a whip. But if not, I shall pursue things which I admire. Yes. Right. Yeah. And not that I'm not doubting that you also aren't including this in, but it's not just because that language, as if it's for me, reminds me of how we talk. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. But Confucius has who else in mind? Everybody. Yeah. Yeah. So that external influence is going to be, if it's bad for the people, then it's not for me, especially if I can't do it rightly. There's a jab in here, though, with the way that this is translated. I think it's funny. But Confucius says, maybe I'm reading into it, the things which I admire, meaning he does not admire riches and does not think that they can be acquired rightly. Because he would even go into carrying a whip, which we just went through understanding that the relationships are not supposed to be controlled through violence. So it's sort of what he's saying is, good luck. I don't think it's possible. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pursue music and food and relationships with the people. Anything else? Seven, that's what we are. 12 through 14. Okay, so the second one, what the master took trouble over were fasting, war, and sickness. So if we're following sort of what's going on here, even if there is that snapshot feel into something new, what do you think 13 has in relationship to 12? What the master took trouble over were fasting, war, and sickness. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. And what are often the causes of war, fasting, sickness? Yeah, misguided values, the pursuing of riches, the pursuing of power, the pursuing of that anti-human heartedness. Yeah. So these two are actually connected, even though they're kind of two separate ideas. This one, the fasting one, has always been a little bit like, because I associate so much ritual to fasting, um, but it could cause, this is way before Confucius is writing, way before the Catholic Church is in existence, but when we look at the fasting of meat during Lent, right, that was a redistribution thing, right, where like the meat was going to the military. So they made it this like, there's a more practical reason why the people were fasting meat. Who never had to worry about what time of year it was and plenty of meat. Right. So I think that's where the fasting probably comes in even. That's the only way that I can understand that, because otherwise fasting can be something that's really beautiful and humbling if you're doing it for the right reasons. But I think it's enforced fasting. Anything else? When the master was in, oh yes, this was great. My kids, when I was teaching this to the kids, they love this one. Um, when the master was in Key, he heard the shu, and for 3 months did not notice the taste of meat. He said, I did not imagine that music making reached such perfection. They literally searched for this song for like hours, like in other classes, because they wanted to hear it. How does this speak to some of the principles we talked about tonight? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like it was so transformative to him, that musical experience. And again, it's not earbuds in isolation, it's in the presence of someone who's actually performing this song, and it alters him in a substantial way, did not notice the taste of meat for 3 months. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really kind of neat. It's really kind of neat. Anything else? It's just a fun one. I just like the fact that he was like transported into another state for 3 months. It makes me think that he had a effervescence and joy to him, that he could exist in a moment for 3 months. Like I am lucky if I get 15 minutes of meditation in the morning. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that musical experience can pop you up and out of some of those maybe demands. Okay. The master said, even in the midst of eating coarse rice and drinking water and using a bent arm for a pillow, happiness is surely to be found. Riches and honors acquired by unrighteous means are to me like the floating clouds. What is going on here? Confucius said. That last clause alters what looks like to be the trajectory of the above statements. And what is that ethical basis? Yeah, it's that which isn't fleeting. You never have enough riches and power to know that you will always have riches and power. But you always have an arm, in most cases. You can always find some rice and you can always have some water. It's the consistency of those things. Anything else? What does this draw up for us today? How does this work for us today? Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, yeah, mhm, right, yeah, wow. Mm. That's a powerful story. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Definitely challenges alongside Tim's story. Number 16 challenges our definitions of what it means to find happiness. Because even paradoxically, in that moment, to be with their daughter was the definition. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Excellent point. Thank you. Whew. This is going to be the end of me. The master said, one is roused by the songs, established by ritual, and perfected by music. Confucius said, what do you think's going on?